You found the Digging Oak Island podcast, a podcaster's journey to discover the truth behind the Oak Island mystery. I'm Dave McBride. Thank you so much for downloading and listening. If you've been listening to and enjoying our podcast, please help us out by leaving us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, come join us on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow the show by going to your search bar, typing in @Digging Oak Island. Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Digging Oak Island podcast. We got a great one for you guys today, especially for those of you who are really devoted fans of the show. We got a great guest that we're going to go to in just a second. I want to wish everybody a happy end of the summer. Those in the States, hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. I know we did here. And also, before we get going, I just want to take a shout out to our friend Jock. Jock wrote me last week and said he had heard about the devastation in New Jersey from Hurricane Ida and asked if everybody here was okay. Jock, yes, we are okay. The area where we live is in the northwest corner of New Jersey, basically, the kind of northern end. It's the foothills of the Appalachians, really, and we're kind of elevated a bit. So the most we got here was a tree limb down and some water in the basement. However, the night Hurricane Ida came through New Jersey, I was driving home from a gig. I'm a professional musician, if you're new to the show. Driving home from a gig right through the thick of everything you saw on the news. I had no idea it was supposed to be like that. I had water up to the windows at one point trying to drive through just a highway overpass, and it was a harrowing experience for sure. When all the interior lights flicker out while you're driving, you know that it may be time to pull over. But I didn't. I kept persevering. I made it through. I felt like I was in an episode of Top Gear going through all this water and craziness, cars on the side of the road, not willing to try it. And here I am in, I'm not kidding you, a 25-year-old Lexus sedan going through water up to the windows. Anyway, I'll explain the Lexus sedan some other day. That's my gig car. That's my beater, as they call it up in Maine. Anyway, Jock, thank you so much for reaching out to us. We are okay, and I hope everybody who's listening from the hurricane-stricken areas, be it the East Coast, be it Louisiana, we're wishing you all the best, and please let us here at Digging Oak Island know if there's anything we can do to help. I know a lot of people ask me about these things. What can we do to help? And I will have some stuff for you. There was a town in New Jersey called Lambertville, beautiful town that was almost completely devastated from the river flooding. And also, obviously, a lot of stuff in New Orleans. And I have a lot of charity organizations I'm looking to start talking about, and I will do so here as well. For those of you who know and have listened before, I also am a DJ on a radio station here in Western Jersey and do a show about music of New Orleans called the Bourbon Street Bistro. It's on WDVR 89.7. You can listen anywhere by going to WDVRFM.org. I am on Wednesday afternoons from 2 to 4 p.m. So between the connection with Louisiana and the connection with Western Jersey, Hurricane Ida was a major event. So we're definitely going to be doing some effort here to help. And I'll teach you or tell you more about that as the weeks go by. I also want to remind everybody that during the off season, I don't like to do the emails right before the show, since where there's no TV show airing this week, so we're not trying to get them in for time constraints. But if you have any questions, any comments, any ideas for the lead up to the show, what you want to see happen in this season, what you think might happen, feel free to get that stuff in. And as this fall progresses, because, the show will hit the air before we know it, but as this fall progresses, we will definitely do a couple of podcasts, at least one, hopefully two, dedicated just to your emails. So email me, Diggin Oak Island, that's DIGGIN, Diggin Oak Island at gmail.com. And hang on, we're going to get to your emails as we get later in the fall. Jock wrote a couple of things also in his email besides asking how we're doing up here. And we will get to the rest of that, Jock, as the time comes. But anyway, thank you for reaching out to us. And yes, we are all okay here, and we hope everybody else is as well. Okay, so what do we got for you today? we have an interview that I think you're going to enjoy. It is with a particular archaeologist by the name of Laird Niven. I reached out to Laird during the season last year, and I'll tell you, I never like to have these conversations with people who are participating in the show. I try not to do it during the airing of the season because it's so difficult for them to talk to you openly while worrying about maybe saying something that they discovered or found that hasn't hit the air yet. And there's all these non-disclosure agreements and all this kind of stuff. So it makes it real hard for them. And they always default because, let's face it, they might not watch every minute of the show, so they might not always know what has come to air and what hasn't, right? So they got to be really cautious about not stumbling over these non-disclosure agreements. So I always try to push these to the end. I reached out to Laird a few times during this season because the focus of his attention has been the Samuel Ball homestead and obviously Samuel Ball himself. We've talked quite a bit on this show. You guys all know how many times I've said things about Samuel Ball and how fascinating and how incredible I find the guy's life story, and also how kind of annoyed I am sometimes about the way the narration presents this man's life. So I really wanted to get Laird on here to talk mostly about Samuel Ball and that work in particular. So the interview you're going to hear is going to be a little bit about his time on Oak Island, how he got there and all that kind of stuff. But this isn't going to be about, what do Rick and Marty eat for breakfast? This is a conversation I wanted to have with him about Samuel Ball. It's not that long. It's only maybe about 30 minutes or so, if I'm not mistaken. The great thing about Laird Niven is he says a lot with few words. He's not a guy who explains things, who is long-winded like myself. He gets right to the point, gives you direct answers, and he's got some fascinating information to give us here. And it's a great conversation about Samuel Ball, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. So we're going to take a short break here, and when we come back, you're going to listen to my interview I conducted just a couple weeks ago with archaeologist Laird Niven. So don't go anywhere. All right, joining me now from Nova Scotia. You all know Laird Niven. Laird, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here and answer some questions for us.
It's my pleasure, David.
The first question I think my listeners would like to know, before I get into the meat of what I want to talk about, which is essentially Samuel Ball, is can you just give them a quick story of how you came to be on Oak Island doing this, sort of your backstory on all of that. I will resist making any comments about whips and brown leather jackets and archaeology jokes. I promise you I'll do my best to do that. But just remind everybody how you got here, because I don't think that story was ever really told all that well on the show.
In 2008, there was a change in the legislation regarding Oak Island. It used to be covered by what they called the Treasure Trove Act, and they rewrote the act, and I think it's called the Oak Island Act now. But part of their requirements were they needed an archaeologist to do what we call an archaeological assessment.
Okay.
Island. So I get a call from Dan Blankenship, and that's how I got in. Actually, he did it through a company I was working for. So I spent a couple of days doing an archaeological assessment for Dan Blankenship on the island. And that's where I was introduced to the Ball Foundation and the McGuinness site and things like that.
So this predates the Laginas and the show.
It does, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the next year I got a call, or later that year, I got a call from Fred Nolan.
Wow.
Who was still in dispute with Dan Blankenship. And didn't have vehicular access to the island.
Right.
So I met him at his museum at the head of the causeway, and we had to walk along the shore to Center Road and then walk to his place. And so that's how I did the work for those two, and that was my introduction to the island. And obviously Prometheus got wind of that later, and gave me a call.
And what made him call you? What was your background leading up to that?
Oh, I had a pretty diverse background, but I was the only archaeologist who had ever done licensed work on Oak Island.
Okay.
Which is really how they knew of me.
That makes all the sense in the world. Okay, so your focus over the last, I guess, 2 years now, right, has been the Samuel Ball site.
Mm-hmm.
This is the third we're in now, I would think, of doing this.
It is.
When you started with Oak Island, when you started doing this, was that always a goal to get to that site and for you to have that as part of your work there?
Well, absolutely, because I grew up in a place called Shelburne, which was founded by loyalists in 1783, sorry. And a satellite town in Shelburne is called Birchtown, which was founded by black loyalists at the same time. And it was actually the largest, briefly, the largest population of freed blacks in North America. Wow. So I did a lot of work in Birchtown on black loyalist sites. So Samuel Ball fit right into what I was interested in.
Okay. So one of the questions that I think we always need to know a little background on Samuel Ball, because again, I don't expect you to agree or disagree with this, but the show offers so much sort of the legend part of his life story, and not as much the real sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? History that's surrounded this man. His is a unique story, I'm sure, in his own way, but it's not that unique to your area, right?
No, it's there were in Birchtown probably 1,521 similar stories.
Wow.
Of enslavement and escape and working for the British and then being granted their freedom. Yeah.
How this? So this is a cultural thing of Nova Scotia. This is part of Nova Scotia's history, then.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, of that group of people, how many? These are people who left because of the Revolutionary War in America?
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
So tell us what we know about Samuel Ball. What do we actually know about Samuel Ball?
A lot of what we know is due to the work of Chip Reid, who's been on the show before, who's a historian in the States. So we know he was born in 1842, I believe, in South Carolina. I believe in the Cometree Plantation. We don't know exactly what he did on the plantation, but he was very handy. So he's probably, we don't think he was a field slave. This would have been a rice plantation. So we don't know much about his parents or his early life, but we do know that in, I believe, 1775 or so, he escaped and came to the British, and served with the British in a non-combatant role. So he was with the Black Battalion, and they did road building and tree clearing and things like that.
Right.
In 1780s, 1782, he would have been in New York with the rest of the Black Loyalists. Chip believes he came to Nova Scotia a little earlier because he's not in the what we call the Book of Negroes, which is a very detailed account of each Black Loyalist who came to Nova Scotia.
Who made that account? Where did that account come from?
That's the British military. This is as they loaded the ships.
Wow.
For Nova Scotia, they detailed description and background and owner and of all of the Black Loyalists that came, but Samuel Ball's not on that list.
Okay.
And in his own words, he's lived in Birchtown for 2 years, but we have no record of him there. And then he went from Birchtown to Chester, and that's where we first start picking him back up in the historical record, where he's buying land in Chester, and then he starts the series of land purchases on Oak Island.
And what time frame is this? This is the 1790s?
1791, I believe, is the first time he shows up historically on Oak Island.
Now, you said in his own words.
Right. So his military, that was part. I'm going to forget the document exactly, but it was
Okay.
a petition hand, I believe, and he gave his own background. So we're not seeing it in documents, but he's stating that that's what he did. So,
Can you give us a typical story of how one of these either escaped or slaves who joined the British military ended up in Nova Scotia? Were they taken there by the military? Did they get there on their own? Were they fleeing violence? I mean, how did that all happen? I know there's a lot of stories about, especially being in America, about loyalists of all, kinds ending up in Canada, in many different areas of Canada. But I'm curious how maybe, because even if we don't know what happened to Samuel Ball, what would your guess be as to how he ended up in Nova Scotia?
Typically, Shelburne in the 1780s was a very, very complicated place. But typically what happened is, as I described, you escape your owner, hopefully with your family, a lot of them with their families.
Right.
And if you served with the British military in whatever capacity, they signed what we called a Birch certificate, a General Birch certificate. And that granted you, because of that service, that granted you freedom. So you had your Birch certificate, and all the Black Loyalists were gathered with the British military in New York. And then there was the organized evacuation to places like Shelburne or St. John, New Brunswick. Those are the two major places that they went.
Oh, really? So just those two, that is kind of where they went. And the military brought them there? The Navy took them there?
Yes. Yeah. They came with as a part of the white loyalists coming as well.
Sort of the exodus of loyalists out of America.
But that being said, there were loyalists who still owned slaves. There were freed slaves who had to go back into indenture just to make a living. It was a really complicated area, but Birchtown was all freed slaves.
See, this is a moment in history that, as Americans, that just didn't happen here. Like, you know what I mean? Especially at that time. And I'm just curious about what life must have been like. I mean, were opportunities there? Because he seems to have taken them. But is that an atypical story for, former slaves, or is he unique in that way? Or what do you think on that?
It's atypical.
It is.
Yeah. I've done a lot of archaeology in Birchtown, including their founder's place, which was very elaborate. Not elaborate. He had a lot of goods. He had fancy clothes, we know, and things like that. But the typical Black Loyalists had nothing. Through our test pitting, our excavations, we realized that these people had basically nothing. One of the first sites I did, we identified it as it's just a hole in the ground, and it's been described as such, that the Black Loyalist lived in holes in the ground with roofs over them, and you got into it through a hole in the roof. And we call them pit houses. They were recommended by the British military because they were warm. They got there in the fall from I guess they were in New York beforehand, but not used to the cold.
Right. Yeah.
So the best way to insulate yourself is dig into the ground. And one of the first sites I ever did was one of these pit houses, which was pretty amazing.
So now you're here on Oak Island, and you're investigating this man's life. Mm-hmm. Before you began your excavation, how much did we really know? Like, before you guys started researching, like, what are records like of that era, of anyone for that matter? They seem sketchy at best when we're looking through it here.
They are very sketchy. There are very few, if any, that we can get a nice full story from. It's just their documents are hard enough. I mean, one problem with historical archaeology is it didn't happen that long ago, but it's amazing how much is lost and how little we know about something that happened 300 years ago.
Yeah. That's what that's the thing that seems so fascinating about all this is we're talking about a man who is a landowner and a farmer of some significance, and we have so little to go by as to what his life was like. We know of ancestors that are here, that are around now, right? But how far can we trace that kind of stuff back? Or do we not even have that?
What we have, I believe, the people who came to visit were related on his wife's side.
Oh, okay.
So not descendants of Samuel Ball. We haven't gone down that route. I mean, one of the things I hoped to do last year was to get some good samples of clay pipes, especially the mouth bit of the clay pipe, because there has been archaeology or DNA work that has been able to extract DNA from that end of a clay pipe. But we didn't do that. But that's something we could consider in the future, and perhaps, get some DNA from Samuel Ball, which would really help us.
When you start one of these projects like this, of any kind, and I'm not just speaking of the Oak Island stuff, what are you looking to learn? Like, what can the archaeology tell people? I think some people are confused by what we might come up with, the information that archaeology gives us, because they're so focused on dates and years from the show that they're not seeing sometimes. I think we don't really get the big picture of what archaeology can offer.
Well, I mean, the research questions for Samuel Ball, if we relate that to the storyline of the show, were, was he wealthy? Was he inordinately wealthy, hinting at perhaps he would have recovered part of the treasure. But other things that have been assumed and said that we don't know are, did he grow cabbages? We don't have any documentary evidence.
Nothing tells you that.
No. Was he a blacksmith? We have no documentary evidence telling us that he was a blacksmith. So these are things that we could look at. It's amazing. We can use remote sensing to see, because if he had a forge, it's going to show up as a huge hit on a magnetometer survey. We figured out with the help of Aaron Helton how much potentially cultivated land he had, because the land just north of his cellar is obviously cultivated. We could see that. And I'm going to forget the figures, but if he was able to produce cabbages and then sauerkraut, which is the commodity they think he might have traded with or sold to the British Navy, right, he had a huge capacity, a huge potential to make a large harvest of cabbage. But that being said, we still don't have that document that tells us he actually grew cabbage.
What did Oak Island look like when he was there?
Well, his work appears to be concentrated on lot 25 and 26, which there are 3 stone walls going from Center Road to the water, or at least they did initially. Right. Some of them are now in the causeway. I believe Dan Blankenship used them in the causeway.
Oh God.
But these walls are 6 feet wide, approximately 2 to 3 feet high, and 1,000 feet long. And there were 3 of them, right? So if you think of a maximum of 2 people, it would have been Samuel Ball, his oxen, and his servant, removed all those rocks from the cultivated land and put them into those walls. It's just. Let's just say he didn't have a lot of spare time. He didn't have a lot of time on his hands.
How quickly does nature take back these things? Like, you're talking about cultivated lands, an area that from the show looks like is now a forest.
It is. It's to us and to most people, it's obviously cultivated. One of the things we learned last year is that his servant was Isaac Butler, right? And he stood to inherit Samuel Ball's property if he changed his name to Ball, which he never did. but our work is showing that he did take over the land. There's a post Samuel Ball occupation in that area, and he kept up the work. So it's not as overgrown as you would have expected, because we think he stayed there into the early 20th century.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then he sold the land?
There's no evidence of sale, as far as I know. I'm not sure. That's a Charles Barkhouse and Doug Kroll.
I'm sure.
But at some point, somebody filled in his cellar with huge rocks. And when I first saw it, you wouldn't have guessed it was really much of a house at all. And the work we did last year, taking the boulders out of the rock, showed us it was a pretty half decent house.
Now I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I'm not sure if you're going to answer.
Okay.
And you're welcome to say, no, I can't answer that. But for instance, last year during this work that we saw what was opined as maybe a trap door or a piece of wood on the floor or something. And we didn't really see any follow up to that.
Yeah. Production always puts me in that position.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of.
It's not going any further. So it was probably part of there was an exterior entrance to the cellar. It was probably part of that trap door.
I gotcha.
Yeah.
So that's been looked at, and
yeah.
We didn't open the door and find gold statues lying in some cellar somewhere. Excellent. I'm glad. Thank you for answering that question. When you go and do stuff like this, as a professional archaeologist, somebody's been doing this for years and years, what kind of challenges is doing this kind of work on Oak Island? And I mean that in a couple of ways. I mean that not only in the
answer in a couple of ways.
Yeah, not only in the television filming aspect way, but you're taking part in what must be a real local celebrity cause celeb, right? Or something along those lines.
No, I knew when I got involved with Oak Island that professionally it was not going to be a good thing.
Really?
And yeah, something came out today just slamming Oak Island and slamming the archaeology on Oak Island as promoting looting and blah blah blah. But I knew that was going to happen. I thought we were making progress over the last 5 years, but apparently within the archaeology community, we're not making progress. They can't dissociate it with the treasure hunt. So I came in with my eyes open. And initially it wasn't the most welcoming of greetings when I got there. I didn't realize how...
it seems like Dan Blankenship was not famous for his hospitality, for one thing.
Well, oh no, sorry. Dan and friends were great. My biggest regret with Dan was, I think we were there for 2 days or 2.5 days. And as I was leaving, I went to say goodbye, and he said, "Oh, I thought you were going to be here for a lot longer." And I thought, well, there's some work I missed, I guess. When I first came on, legislated by the province, which is not something the American audience is a big fan of.
Right.
It's government overreach. We headed to Lot 24, and I didn't say anything to Gary. I didn't know Gary. I didn't realize how he felt. But he was really anxious. He thought everything was going to be shut down. And, basically
because you're there.
Because I'm there, which I actually ended up doing at the end of the day. But I just followed him and let him dig and make sure that he wasn't digging anything significant, and recorded what he dug. And, but it was that day that Marty started finding a concentration of stones, and I had to say no more.
Right.
But only that little area. I didn't shut the island down, which a lot of people thought I would. So.
My follow-up question was, there was a point in this season where he referred to the dreaded archaeologists.
Is that Marty or?
Marty.
Yeah.
I think on more than one occasion. I mean, I assume he's referring to the time it takes for you guys to do your work, the oversight you have. I mean, again, and this goes back to my original question, which was how does the process of Oak Island affect what would normally be an archaeological dig? I mean, I would assume you're usually given free access to an area, and here it might be a little bit different.
Oh no, we have free access. I think Marty's looks at it from a landowner point of view. Right? There are two areas where they're restricted right now. The Ball Foundation and the McGinnis Foundation. So he sees that as kind of losing land, which isn't really true. The province doesn't really want all the land. It's just that if any work that has to be done there has to be done by archaeologists, right? But I mean, working on Oak Island it has its own challenges. Being filmed has a lot of challenges. It probably increases the time we spend on a certain task by 75%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a slow process.
Wow, that's a much bigger number than I thought you were going to say.
It's a slow process.
And I would assume they're filming and interrupting you a lot more than we ever get to see as fans of the show. I mean, I would assume there's a lot more time spent there than we ever actually get.
The Ball site last year was kind of an oasis. They filmed less on the Ball site because we were doing real archaeology, which is
right.
not. It can be kind of tedious. But yes, you're filmed constantly. Usually 2 to 3 cameras on you, and if you find anything, you have to stop. Right. Show it to them and blah blah blah, and then they do things from different angles, and then they do drone shots. So it's an interesting process, but in terms of productivity, it's not best.
Your work and your job on the island is different and not associated with the other archaeologists that we see, correct? Like they're under a different set of guidelines, a different set of circumstances than you are, correct?
They're in what we call the non-monitored zone. Yeah.
And what does that mean? That means you're actually monitored by the Canadian province and they're not?
By the province of Nova Scotia.
By the Nova Scotia province, yeah.
Work under what we call a heritage research permit, yeah.
I got one last one for you, and then I'll let you go.
All right.
Before you came to Oak Island, you're from Atlantic Canada.
Yeah, Nova Scotia.
What did you think of Oak Island before you got there? What was growing up? Were you aware of it? Is it an important thing?
I'd never been there. I was vaguely aware of it. So I remember Dan Blankenship and the severed hands kind of thing in the 70s.
That was a big deal. The severed hand that was yeah.
That was a newsworthy thing. And then hearing about the Michigan group, the crazy people, lots on Oak Island. And here I am. That's a big part of my childhood. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had one last one, and I've asked you this before, but I want it written out. One of the things that gets in my head that I cannot get past when it comes to Samuel Ball is this constant referring to him as one of the richest men in all of Nova Scotia. And I have this nervous tick that happens every time they say it because they seem to have said it quite a bit, and there's no way in my mind that can be true. Just from looking at what his house must have been compared to what I'm sure are mansions from the actual richest people. Exactly. Can you help clarify that and give us a little word on that?
Yeah. So in terms of material culture, what we found so far, there's nothing to indicate great wealth. And he stayed in his house was decent. It had a pretty extensive cellar part.
Why would that be?
That we don't know yet.
Okay.
That we don't know yet. It was quite deep and quite, it was larger. It was meant for storing something. That's for sure. Compared to the McGinnis site, which was probably a third of the size. But I think what a lot of that is based on is his land acquisitions. because he had 100 acres on the mainland, and then however many acres he had on Oak Island itself. And they just based that, he accumulated all of this, and he paid, quite dearly for the land. So that's what it's based on: how much land he bought, or how much land he had. Not on. There were no other expressions of material wealth that they could see.
I mean, in the 1790s and in the early part of the 1800s, Nova Scotia must have had rich sea captains who lived in large mansions in Halifax, right? I mean,
yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, he wouldn't have been close to that.
Right. Okay.
But there's some speculation that as a slave, perhaps, he didn't want to express his wealth. I don't know. Right now, he's a very well-to-do, successful black loyalist.
Well, that was what I was going to say. I mean, what we shouldn't gloss over is the fact that, considering the situation that the man's life was in, he really does seem to have been an incredibly successful guy.
Incredibly successful through his own hard work, and that's my problem with the did he recover some of the treasure?
Me too.
You take away from what he did on the land, and if you stand in his house and look at what he cleared, it just boggles your mind, right?
That's exactly where I'm going with this. I mean, I feel like we throw this treasure stuff in there, and the guy really seems to be an incredibly hardworking person who really made his. I mean, it's a great story of success.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt.
Do we know of his relationship with McGinnis and those people? Do we know of it? Because it's very murky, all that kind of stuff. Do we? I mean,
so their backgrounds are very similar, except for the slave part, but their Revolutionary War backgrounds are quite similar. I think they're both in New Jersey. Personally, I think they had to have known each other.
Right.
And that's a connection we haven't made yet. But I think there's something in that. I think there's perhaps some reason that they were both on the island.
You're leaving us these little tea leaves. All right, and this work at Samuel Ball is continuing now as we speak?
I can't say.
You can't say. Can you say this, though? The COVID situation in Nova Scotia. I get that question a lot. A lot of viewers concerned about whether or not work can continue and if things have happened because there was another shutdown that we heard a little bit about of here. And listen, in America, we think the world ends in San Francisco. So, we don't hear a lot about that kind of stuff. So where are we with that?
I think we had 7 cases the other day. We're open to travelers now. We're open to Americans now.
Okay.
Yeah. Nova Scotians are being really careful. We don't have the Delta variant is here, but only in a couple of cases.
It's all over the place here.
So things are slowly opening up. Restaurants are open, but we're being very careful, and obviously on the set, because COVID means, I can't even imagine how many thousands of dollars a day. We get tested twice a week.
Yeah. Wow.
Take all the precautions. Yeah.
Vaccination rates are up there. I mean, does that?
I think 75% have at least one dose.
Okay. So you're close to similar to what we are down here.
Everybody on the island is fully vaccinated.
So viewers can rest assured that we are working on Oak Island as we speak.
I think that's tends to be the worst kept secret in the world. So.
It really is. It really is. Listen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this, but also I've asked you a couple of questions on behalf of listeners a few times, and you have been incredibly generous with some of those answers. And, I have a show where we get a lot of very curious people that want to learn details that I simply cannot ever possibly pretend to know. And you've been incredibly helpful with that. I can't thank you enough. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Digging Oak Island podcast. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Laird Niven. I know a lot of people out there want to know a little bit more about the show. That's just not what I'm interested in, what goes on behind the scenes. The only question I had on my list that I didn't ask him, and this is just kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from, was I was going to ask him if I had time, how many times have you been asked about your Newcastle United hat? Because I've heard at least 10, just myself. Anyway, thank you very much to Laird Niven for taking the time out to do that, especially at a time of the year over the summer where he is all in, knee deep in his work over there on Oak Island. And we did talk a little bit off the air about some of the things that were going on, meetings and stuff like that. And he didn't divulge anything, but he just kind of gave me an idea of how intense I guess it can be there, really, is what that's all about. Anyway, my great thanks to Laird. Hopefully we can get him on again, maybe next summer, to have another conversation about Samuel Ball and see where this has all gone. Shameless plug time before we get going. I produce another podcast. It's called Sit Downs and Sessions. We're not doing much in the summertime, but we do have a couple things up there where we're talking about some beer with a brewer from a local area. It's me and my friend and fellow radio host Chris Poe. We kind of sit down with a couple of pints and we talk about whatever we want to talk about, whether it be brewing and pubs or politics or the paranormal. We do a lot of talk about music. We've had some musicians interviewed on there. So come and join us. Just find us on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, Sit Downs and Sessions, and give us a listen there. Thanks very much for doing so. Let's see. I'm also back on the air as a DJ. I mentioned this at the top of the show. I'll mention it again. Every Wednesday from 2 to 4 p.m., you can find me at WDVR-FM, and you can find that at WDVRFM.org if you're not in the New Jersey area. I do a show called the Bourbon Street Bistro, which focuses on the music of New Orleans. We play everything from jazz to blues to Zydeco and all things in between there. So come and join me over there. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. It helps get the word out on the show, and I just want to thank everybody who's done so already. I am reading them. I see them. I appreciate so much you taking the time to do that and to leave those kind words for us here. It really does mean everything to us. Thank you very, very much. Also, don't forget, join us on Facebook and Twitter. We are at Diggin' Oak Island. And again, if you have any questions or comments you want me to answer on a future show, hopefully we'll get a listener question show up this fall. Just email me, digginoakisland@gmail.com. And don't forget, I'll probably be answering it on a show. So if you don't want it answered over the podcast airwaves here, just make a note of that, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. So until we speak again, I'm Dave McBride. Thank you for listening to Diggin' Oak Island.